Okay, let's go to Freiburg, Germany now, and bring in Christof Ruhl, who's a senior research scholar at Columbia University's Centre on Global Energy Policy. Pleasure to have you on, Christof. So, as I mentioned, oil easing, despite what seems to be renewed, maybe even increasing military action. Are market traders just working on the premise that for politics and various reasons, this is a war that just can't last very long?
I think analysts are learning two things about oil markets, which the market probably has long priced in. The first is that this is a market structurally an oversupply, meaning if there would be no crisis, supply would be much higher than consumption. So one expectation is that when the crisis eventually disappears, the market will return to normal fairly fast. And the second is that oil is just not as important as it used to be. The share of oil which we need to produce a given amount of global output, global GDP, of employed people is much, much lower than it used to be only 10, 20 years ago. And so the translation of higher prices into an economic crisis is also requiring much higher oil prices than it used to be. So you have a double effect here. The crisis causes oil prices to rise less because people think it's not so bad, and higher oil prices cause less damage to the economy than before.
When Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz effectively, it caused chaos on the markets. And now, not only that, we have the Houthis threatening to shut down Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Does that not severely increase the risk of disrupted supply lines and ultimately inflation?
It does. And what we have to distinguish here is one event which is like this closing the Strait of Hormuz, which we are now have seen is something which you can turn off, turn on, turn off, turn on, these mutual blockades. We have to distinguish that from the physical attack on a pipeline system. That would actually create physical damage, which would take a long time to repair. That would be a totally new quality. If that happens, or if that threat would be credible, you would see a much stronger price reaction than what we have seen by this on-off, on-off, off-on in the Strait of Hormuz, sorry.
Yeah, BlackRock are estimating the conflict might add nearly 1 percentage point to global inflation. Do you think they're underestimating this?
No, I think because oil, as we discussed, because oil has lost so much of its importance, it means two things. Traditionally, an oil price damages the economy by taking away purchasing power from people. So demand falls and growth gets impacted. That is no longer as bad as it used to be. And the second route is traditionally an oil price increases inflation, and that causes central banks to interfere, and that causes a recession. That's also not as big as it used to be because the oil price is the oil is a much smaller share of the global economy, and therefore an increase in oil prices doesn't translate into inflation globally to the same extent as it did 10, 20, 30 years ago. So I again think markets actually had the better instinct. The panic of many analysts is proven to be wrong by a market much more stable than they expected.
The conflict showed us, though, how quickly disruptions in energy supply lines affect the man on the street. The petrol prices went up considerably. I mean, it was becoming a cost of living issue for a lot of people in several countries around the world. Is it a situation we are adapting to at this point? Is there a way that we can learn to get around these disruptions to supply lines, or is it constantly going to be a problem?
There's no such thing as constant safety. I mean, even now when all these workarounds are being built to avoid the Strait of Hormuz, new pipelines and all of this, you saw the Houthi threat. A pipeline, an overland pipeline, is actually more vulnerable than a shipping lane in many respects and easy to target. So there's no complete certainty. What we are learning is that these disruptions meet a very well organized, very flexible modern market, which is capable of buffering them to some extent. Yes, gasoline prices have gone up a little bit, but honestly, this is far cry from the predictions of disruptions and long queues. We don't see an economic crisis. We don't see long queues at the gas stations. We saw some initial impact, mostly in Asia, mostly on jet fuels and on petrochemicals, but even that was buffered. And much of the price increase, which we have seen, for example, in the US, gasoline prices went up massively. People ask why. And the answer is because US refineries turned into making jet fuel instead of gasoline because that was short globally and in high demand and had a higher margin. So the market reacted exactly as it should be, and some consumers in some segments felt the pain. But given the magnitude of the threat, I think this was quite a modest reaction.
Interesting take on it. Appreciate it. Christof Ruhl from Columbia University, my guest.
Thanks for having me. It was my pleasure.